What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse, and we're doing things different this week, mainly because I make the rules and I feel like doing things different. So the first thing you're going to notice, no guest. It's just me and my buddy, Austin Amandolia. Austin, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm ready for you to grill me on some best ball, and I'm waiting for you to throw in a keep trade cut that I'm just not expecting.
Yeah, the keep trade cuts I try to keep you on your toes with because I know they annoy you for the most part. But I think it's a good one this week, and I think it's more of an obvious one this week. I made the mistake. I don't know if you've paid attention to our Wednesday show at all, but I made the mistake of trying to introduce a keep trade cut to that show, but they were terrible players that shouldn't be compared to one another. And Liz Loza basically looked at me like I was an idiot, which is not a look you want to get at any point in your life from Liz Loza. But I tried to compare second year running backs, Rachaad White, James Cook, and Brian Robinson. And it became very clear very quickly that Brian Robinson does not belong in a discussion with James Cook and Rachaad White. So a mistake was made, unfortunately, in front of Liz Loza, name dropped, picking it back up now. But hey, life goes on. As I mentioned, Austin, I wanted to get a little weird with today's show. So I woke up motivated, thinking about the show. We knew today was going to be a best ball show. I always try to do best ball shows at the beginning of the month, end of the month, somewhere right around there. And I looked at your show sheet for your best ball show that we're going to talk a lot more about and noticed that you guys are talking about smaller sit and go tournaments, and not necessarily always smaller, but the sit and go tournaments where you're not playing everybody. And I thought to myself, we've never done a small tournament on this show. We've never walked out with just absolutely stacked rosters. And if you've never seen this view before, that's because you're not a complete psycho. This is what a 6-person draft looks like on Sleeper. That's right, folks. We are doing a sit and go 6-person mock. Everybody is going to have stacked teams, but I'm going to let Austin talk more about this. That changes your strategy quite a bit being in a smaller tournament because everybody has a good team. So, Austin, I'm going to go ahead and get this draft started. Bro Cal is in the room. I'm confident that there will not be an auto pick to start the draft. I put everybody on a 1-minute clock, and Austin, I did this for you because I want you to be able to talk about your players a little bit more. But as always, we're going to ignore the draft for a little bit. Austin, explain the difference. Explain to folks who may be new to best ball and have always thought about best ball the same way they thought about DFS is I'm going to make $1 million. What else can you do with best ball? What is sit and go?
Yeah, so I use my sit and go draft to really try and build my bankroll and to help myself break even. It's similar to those cash contests in DFS where you're doing head to heads, you're doing double ups, 50-50s, what those types of contests. And the goal is to try and break even and help build your bankroll over time so you have more money to throw at those tournaments. So I'll use sit and goes. I'll enter a lot of them because I want to try and build some insurance for my best ball leagues that I'm going to win in some of these leagues, and B, it allows me to feel more aggressive in my tournaments because I'm not banking on those to help myself make money.
I think the bankroll mentality is something that this is going to sound like I'm being an elitist, but I'm not. I think the bankroll mentality is what separates the very serious fantasy player from the more casual fantasy player. And what I mean by that is, I mean, even myself, I'm not good at DFS, so I don't bankroll manage. I play it like it's a lottery, and I'm just trying to win $1 million every week. So I think that's a very interesting thing that you're looking for almost checks and balances. You know you want to play the lottery, but why use your money to play the lottery when if things go well, you can use everybody's money from last year?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just about your goal. Like some people, they just like to have that lottery ticket. And if you go into it saying, I'm playing the lottery, sure, go for it, whatever. Do it as fun for you and what fits within your budget. But for me, I'm I do want to try and make money on this eventually. And so having these insurance leagues is really helpful, particularly in these small contests where for this one on Underdog, top 2 would win. So I just have to beat 4 players to make money. And that feels a lot easier to me than beating 900,000 people because
Yeah.
Best Ball Mania is a ginormous tournament.
So when you say top 2 win, do you know off the top of your head the prize structure? Is second place winning their money back and first place is winning the rest? Obviously, there's a rake involved.
Yes, there is a rake involved. So the website Underdog and Best Ball, they'll make some money when you give your entry fee. On Underdog, if you're in a 6-team league and you finish in the top 2, you're making money no matter what. So
Oh,
$5 entry in a 16 league. First place comes away with $16. Second place comes away with $11. So if you cash, you're at least doubling your money guaranteed.
And looks like we're gonna have some auto drafters. Whatever the opposite of a shout out is, a yelling at to our buddy Zach at the 4 spot. At least this early, and hopefully he gets in here later. At least this early, I don't even really mind auto drafters because you're still there's something to learn in this situation because the top players are still the top players. It's going to affect build quality because Austin, I feel like when you're in these small tournaments and we see these terrible jokes on fantasy Twitter all the time about what is this, an 8-man league, because everybody just ends up with these super stacked rosters. And that's what we're going to have in this situation. But Austin, there's a method to the madness of building around when you know everybody's going to have a good roster, correct?
Yeah, exactly. People always they just like are so negative on these smaller leagues, and I'm like, okay, but are you playing them when you do best ball?
Yeah,
Because I
you
think
heard it
most
here
people are.
first. People on Twitter are negative. That's the first time anyone's ever said that.
Really?
Yeah.
People on X, Ryan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I don't know why I feel the need to throw up the X every time, but it's just going to be my thing now when we make fun of this stupid X bird app.
Yeah, there you go. No, but yeah, people are always down on 18 leagues because they're like, oh, that's not even hard because you're just getting a bunch of elite players. If you've played in an 18 league, it is hard in its own special way because you're like, okay, cool. I get to pick between Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill for who's going to have the better season. If you tell me now which of those two is going to have a better season, I would call you a liar because you probably don't know. And so you have to you have to find your strategic advantages elsewhere. And so there are some different ways to do that. Like, you can lock up certain positions, the bully tight end, the bully running back routes, they become more viable than in some other leagues. So it becomes more about overall roster build than just like which players you have the better takes on. Cause like all the players are good.
Yeah. I'm realizing a mistake I may have made as this draft is dragging along with setting a 1-minute clock. I did it to give you time to talk about your picks, but you're a professional at this. So you're going to have time to talk about your picks. I'm wondering if it's going to let me switch to 30 seconds mid draft and just scare the shit out of everybody because we're never going to finish this draft as it stands. So.
Oh, that is a dangerous proposition.
I'm doing it right now. So everyone's about to learn the hard way.
Oh, it happens. I'm impressed.
There we go.
Sleeper, every time I like make a change in Sleeper, I'm like, what is about to happen?
Yeah.
Are we about to like just completely like this draft is going to go away and we're going to have to start over?
Yeah, that's well, and you know what? Let me tell a little story. So first and foremost, one of our drafters is with us. So JFar, you now know it's a 30-second clock. And I just put it in the group chat as well. So I started this draft as our normal 12-team draft. And as I said, I got motivated this morning. Well, unfortunately, Austin got back to me on whether or not this draft would actually function after I had already sent the draft invite. So we had like 7 people in the draft already. And I'm like, hey, all, I'm switching this to a 16 draft. Switch over. And our buddy Burns, who was picking from the 5 pick, was stuck because he had the 7th pick and didn't switch. And it just like showed him outside of the draft. And that was my worry as well. Like, is it going to just kick everybody out of the draft because I need Austin in the draft? And then I didn't know if my invites were going to work. Now I had no worry we were going to be able to fill a 6-person draft. However, I was a little worried about alienating some of our loyal viewers and loyal drafters at this point. Austin, I'm going to jump right in on your team build. Like I said, I'm going to do things a little differently this week. Normally I don't talk about the drafters team until we get to the end of the show. But with this, I want Austin to kind of talk about what he's building as he's building it. And then we're honestly going to probably be able to go through and talk more about the other teams in this draft as well. So Austin, you start off with Kelsey. I don't think there's any surprise there. But I think we do need to talk a little bit about it. So every week we use the words Travis Kelsey and positional advantage in the exact same order because that is a part of his name at this point. When you're looking to get different in a 6-team league, that almost widens the gap of being the first person to draft Travis Kelsey, does it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where like you could think like, oh, it's a 16 league, so everybody's just gonna have a good team, and there might not be like that actual advantage. Oh, Josh Jacobs is still around. Cool. There may not be that advantage of getting Travis Kelsey that early because everybody's gonna get a decent tight end, but like we saw last year, he was still 100 points better than the tight end too. And so like with that, like he's gonna give you the advantage you want no matter what. And also taking him that early gives you a chance to really like just win in the tight end position, because ultimately, like, you have four positions that you can gain advantages in. You're not going to be able to change your lineup from week to week. And so you need to kind of make that call early in the year. Like, what positions am I going to be stacked in, and where am I going to punt and look for value elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that's a great call. And then your running backs are interesting. And actually, this leads us to some camp news because a lot of the guys I wanted to talk about have all been drafted. So let's talk about running backs. We haven't on our show had to dive as much into the running back drama as others. And maybe that's because we're doing a mock draft every week and we have all these teams to talk about. But you ended up with two of the guys around the drama. Now, Saquon Barkley signed his 1-year deal. He's going to be there. But on the same day that Saquon Barkley signed his deal, I read that Josh Jacobs actually flew out of Las Vegas. So they seem to be kind of like far apart on where they're going in life. But I'm actually not even going to start with either of those two. We'll get back to your build in a second. My love affair with Jonathan Taylor took a weird hit this week as Jim Irsay wanted to prove to the world that he hates his best player. Austin, you kind of had it summed it up best for what you think Jim Irsay's motivations are. So I'm not going to steal your words. What do you believe Jim Irsay's motivation this week in just absolutely pissing Jonathan Taylor off was?
Well, I think there's an opening in the NFL for the new worst owner in the league, and Jim Irsay just submitted his application this week. Now that Dan Snyder's gone, we got to fill that role. We got to have the owner that everybody hates, and I guess it's going to be Jim Irsay.
Yeah. So if you guys missed the news, I don't remember the exact quotes anymore, but like 3 days ago, Jim Irsay made some comment about how he believed running backs should not be paid, keeping in mind that he has one of the best running backs in the league who is due to be paid. The very next day, Josh, I'm just leaving your comment up on the screen at this point. The very next day, Jim Irsay said that he was not going to pay Jonathan Taylor. The day after that, Jonathan Taylor requested a trade. And then Jim Irsay said that he is not trading Jonathan Taylor. And then he got weird and melodramatic and cryptic and basically said that, like, when he's dead and Jonathan Taylor's out of the league, the NFL must still go on. Like, he is this flag bearer for the NFL and just hates running backs. So I don't know what any of this means. I think it's safe to say Jonathan Taylor will not be traded. However, we had Marvin Eloquent on the Dynasty show last night, and he believes there's a chance Taylor does get traded. Are you hands off on Jonathan Taylor right now, Austin, or is there a point where there's going to be a dip you can buy?
Oh no, I definitely am still in on Jonathan Taylor. Like, my philosophy on this tends to be just like draft talent, right? Like, draft the best players and it'll most likely work out in the end. I think there are several running back needy teams in the league that Jonathan Taylor would fit well in. Like, I like him in Chicago. I like him in Washington. Like, I think he would find a landing spot if he doesn't end up just staying with Indianapolis. And he's going to come out with something to prove. I love betting on players who are betting on themselves. And so I'm still with Jonathan Taylor. I think he'll come back and have a great season. I think it's a good time to buy him low if he starts falling in drafts.
And I think there's an interesting, the one thing I didn't mention is that last night there was a report late at night that he was going to go on the non-football injury list because he hurt his back working out. And then he immediately was like, never hurt my back, never told anybody I hurt my back, get better sources. So it's ugly because what if Jim Irsay is the source just throwing bullshit out there and now you're fracturing this relationship. I think a Jonathan Taylor holdout is not off the table. So you're more confident than I am. And that brings us back to your build because you're clearly more confident. You go in with Saquon Barkley playing on a 1-year deal and Josh Jacobs, who may not play, and then start attacking your wide receivers. So right now, I feel like, and you even made the comment out loud, oh my God, Josh Jacobs is still here. You are all about, no matter the league size, buying the dip when it comes to these elite players.
I think so. And I think part of it too is just like doing different things than what other people in the draft room are doing. And we'll get more into this, but like the drafters at the 1 and 2 spots both went heavy wide receiver early. And similarly with Zach at the 3rd spot, he got 2 receivers in the first 3 rounds. And so I started making the bet, okay, these guys are all betting on these receivers. I'm going to bet on the running backs and say that I'm going to pick 2 or 3 running backs that are going to separate from everyone else enough to give me the positional advantage there.
I love that. And guys, I'm not going to move the draft right away. We'll scroll down a little bit later. But like I said, I'm going to run today's show a little differently. We have a small setting. We're going to talk about these teams as they're right in front of us. And Austin, I want to kind of talk about you kind of said building your team a little different. And one of the things that immediately jumped out to me is I don't think there's going to be a lot of 3 quarterback builds. I think there's going to be plenty of 2 QB builds. You grabbing 2 elites, 2 of the top 3 right away makes sense to me. Jalen Hurts going next makes sense to me because those are the 3, and those 3 kind of run away with it. And I don't know that there are going to be any that really catch up with them. You can have an argument. But what I would throw out is, would there not have been value for at least one person having saw what you and Brocal did on waiting on quarterback, knowing that there are only likely to be 12 quarterbacks drafted, 15 at the most, and then doing maybe a 3 quarterback build where everybody else is going to have a 2 quarterback build? Would there not have been value when you look that every team in the first, I don't have those are way too small for my old eyes. Every team in the first 8 rounds already has at least 1 quarterback. To me, that strikes it as there was an opportunity for one team in this draft.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in this case, it would have been Zach's team. And I know he was auto drafting for a little bit. So we may have to blame Sleeper for that because
Okay.
Sleeper doesn't really play into roster construction as much. But if I was in Zach's position, that would have been where I really started to kind of wait a little bit. Now, he already had like 4 stacked running backs, which again, that was a little bit of auto picking. So I may not have gone for that early. But with Zach's build, I probably could have waited a little bit longer and said, okay, you know what? These other players, they've boxed out the quarterback position. And so now I'm going to find value elsewhere. And I think having like Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor sort of successfully does that for Zach's team, even though he was on auto draft.
The closest thing we have to a 0 running back, because Joel wasn't able to draft today due to work, is Donflict picking from the 2 spot. 0 running, calling anything 0 running back in a 6-team league is interesting. I think by the standards of 0 running back, you'd have to wait until double-digit rounds to truly have a 0 running back build in a 6-team league, because Donflict waited 4 or 5 rounds to take his first running back and still gets Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker and walks away with just a stable of wide receiver ones: Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jaylen Waddle, and still has running backs with upside. Now, before we talk about his team in general, Austin, I want to get your opinion on another bit of camp news that came out yesterday. Ken Walker is dealing with a groin injury, and Zach Charbonnet, who everybody loved as his, usurper, if you will, is dealing with the shoulder injury, and they were both called out indefinitely. When I see the word indefinitely, my heart sinks. Now, again, you're about buying the dip, but now we're talking about a dip off of 2 running backs who are going to vulture each other. Is this the spot, Austin, where you're going to stay away completely?
No, I'm going to still buy the dip because
I'll find at some point where you just won't draft somebody.
Yeah, I think you'll have to get to the realm of like someone like Alvin Kamara, who I'm pretty confident he's going to miss time. Boy, I do not like any of the players at my current draft spot. We'll just go with Treylon Burks, but I don't love that. Yeah, so with Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet, I mean, we already assumed they were going to be vulturing each other somewhat, but I think they both are complementary and make each other better. So I'm not afraid of taking either one of them. And this news of like indefinitely, I'm just like, yeah, of course it's indefinite. We don't know. Like they probably don't want to disclose, right? They want to keep their secrets. Like we're not at a point where there's mandatory reporting of injuries from week to week. And so they're probably going to just like wait a little while and announce whenever they feel like it, which I get. And also, we were talking about before the show started, like, this is progress for Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll is always like, I'm optimistic they're going to be back in a couple of weeks. And it's like, no. Don't put those expectations on them. They're just going to get hurt again or not meet those expectations. And then we're going to be like, what's up with you, Pete Carroll? You were way off on your prediction here. So I'm fine with it. I'm fine with still buying the dip on Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet.
I have a question to ask you just about team building and what we're seeing versus trends versus what we're seeing here. Now, Austin, you do a great job of explaining this. So before I get into this question, you have always explained very well about the difference between sleeper ADP and underdog ADP. And that's going to kind of lead into my question. So I'm going to give you time to talk about both of them. Hutch last week did a great job of pointing out how we're seeing like almost historic low RB being drafted numbers. If you expand this, every 2 rounds is a single round of a actual fantasy draft. We're not seeing that here. We saw 5 running backs go in the first 2 rounds, which would be the equivalent of the first round of a regular draft. 3 more go in the next round, and then the round after that, 7 go. Running backs are being hoarded in this very small league. Is that, and again, talk about this as a general thing. Let's start with the ADP. Is this a fault of sleeper ADP versus underdog ADP? Will we have seen fewer running backs go if this was maybe run on underdog?
Yeah, I think we probably would have seen a few less running backs go because, like you say, like right now on Underdog by ADP, there are only 3 running backs going in the first round. That's Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, and Bijan Robinson. Nick Chubb is kind of flirting with that first round territory. And I think some of this is because like right now, you're still getting ADP being determined by a lot of people that have been drafting this entire offseason. And so that's going to be people who are more often in the fantasy industry, or they're really doing this and thinking strategically about it throughout the offseason. And so they're probably buying into the zero RB builds a little bit more and devaluing running backs because of injuries and everything. And also, I think this is somewhat to do with like the narratives we've been talking about with the running back market and how devalued they are by the NFL. Like every running back kind of feels in jeopardy right now because NFL owners are just like, yeah, we don't care about this position, which I think is bonkers. But I think there's some element of like the NFL news cycle is contributing to that. But I do think I see a trend of running backs starting to trend upward as we move closer to
Okay.
the start of fantasy season, because I think you're starting to get more. I don't want to say casual, but you're getting people. If you're starting your drafts in August, you're not paying as much attention to all of the offseason trends as someone who started drafting in April. And that's just the nature of it. And so I think at that point, you're starting to see where some people are to some of the quote unquote norms of fantasy football where running backs are more valued.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to throw it out there. I don't know if I'm having internet trouble, but I just lost Austin for a second. So if you guys see me getting choppy, I apologize. The draft will go on. Austin, one name jumped out at me, and it's early in the draft for this guy to go. 7'6" Alexander Mattison from JFAR. And JFAR is in the comments, so he is going to hear whatever you're saying here. When I look at these early running backs, and even with you're seeing the rise of running backs, taking Mattison that early feels like a bit of a stretch to me because we're seeing him go, what is that? 10 picks after Travis Etienne. And I think there's a pretty wide gap between he and Travis Etienne.
Yeah, I think so too. But when I look at the running backs, like if you were just set on taking a running back at that position, the only running back that went after where I'm like, yeah, I clearly would have taken that running back earlier than Madison is probably Damian Pierce. Like I feel like Madison is kind of one of the last running backs before you get into this running back dead zone. Like not huge on J.K. Dobbins. DeAndre Swift has some risk. Javonte Williams, we don't know if he's going to start or he's out on injury. I love where I got David Montgomery because I love David Montgomery, but
I
like,
was going to say there are 3 names that jump out to me. David Montgomery for you in the 13th, and then Miles Sanders in the 10th, and James Conner in the 11th, both going to Donflict. I don't think you can't see Conner on the screen right now, but those guys all went in those picks, all well ahead of Alexander Mattison to me. And I just, Alexander Mattison has never been a super efficient back, even as a backup. And we've talked about this for ages. Backup running backs are supposed to be more efficient. If we're going to see more volume, we're going to probably see that efficiency drop. And I think that's a question mark for me when it comes to Alexander Mattison.
yeah, I mean, for me, I'm basically no longer drafting Alexander Mattison because I don't want to draft him where his
Well,
ADP
certainly not if I'm
currently
taking him
is.
this damn early. Exactly.
There was a point in time, like I think right towards the end, just before Dalvin Cook got cut, I drafted Madison a couple of times as like my 3rd or 4th running back, just as like, yeah, you know what? The value's there. He's going to get some touches. He'll have some weeks regardless. So I might as well try for it here. But I'm not at this point. I'm likely letting other people draft him.
Yeah. Last thing I want to do before I scroll and take a look more at the draft is I want to kind of run down the first 12 picks, because for folks who are tuning in who might want to view this from a redraft lens, I think this is a pretty accurate first 12 picks that you can expect in a standard 12-team league. So we had Justin Jefferson go first, Jamar Chase second, Travis Kelce third. Christian McCaffrey was an auto pick, but I think he went where he should have went. Tyreek Hill fifth, and then Bijan Robinson sixth. And I think we need to give some time to Bijan Robinson. It's been a little while. Cooper Kupp seventh, Austin Eckler eighth, Stephon Diggs ninth, Saquon Barkley 10th, CeeDee Lamb 11th, Nick Chubb 12th. Do any of these stand out to you, Austin, for not belonging in the first round of a half PPR redraft?
No. I think I'm fine with all of these players in the first round. You can make an argument that AJ Brown should be up above Nick Chubb. I think you could potentially make an argument for DeVonta Adams, but I do worry a little bit about Jimmy Garoppolo in that offense, and I don't know if he's going to be able to feed DeVonta Adams with the volume that he's going to need to return. So I think all of these work in a first round. I maybe Derrick Henry could get up there because I feel like he's somehow still undervalued, but
yeah,
there's not really a player in the first round that I'm like, yeah, they shouldn't be in the first round.
I think it's a fair assessment. I want to spend a little time, and I'm still going to scroll the draft, but I want to spend a little time talking about Bijan Robinson, because we haven't had the reason to really talk much about Bijan Robinson. Oh my God, you guys finished the draft already. I guess that's the benefit of setting it to a 30-second clock. So I'm just going to kind of put this up here, and I'll find more content to talk about here in just a little bit. But Bijan Robinson, I feel like the average fantasy drafter coming in August, and you're going to see a lot of new people paying more attention to fantasy football in the upcoming month. They may not understand the appeal of Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson was the 8th pick overall by your Atlanta Falcons. And for most draft pundits, which I am not one of, he is being compared to Saquon Barkley coming into the league, to Ezekiel Elliott coming into the league, a guy who's going to come in and be a 3-down back right away and be damn good in that role. He goes in the 6th pick of this draft, but overall, I am seeing a lot of people saying rookie running backs tend to struggle. I am of the ilk that Bijan may be the exception to that rule. Saquon Barkley was the RB2 his rookie year, Austin. Ezekiel Elliott was the RB2 his rookie year. There's no reason to think Bijan Robinson can't be the RB2 as a rookie in the most run-heavy offense in the entire NFL, is there?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think that when we look at rookie running backs struggling, it's really mostly second round rookie running backs. It's not running backs that have been drafted in the first round. In fact, I looked at this last year whenever I was writing my article on Najee Harris and looking at him coming into his second round. And there's actually a very stout history of running backs finishing well in their rookie season, particularly those drafted in the first round. Like you said, Saquon Barkley, RB2, Todd Gurley was RB9. Jonathan Taylor was RB6 his rookie year. Najee Harris, RB3. Like, there were several examples. And then some of the other players that were a little bit lower, like Le'Veon Bell, he was only RB14, but still RB14 is not bad. And then his year 2 was up to RB1. So I feel fine with his prospects, with Bijan Robinson's prospects to end up in the RB1 team. And there's just a great history there. Like, I do think there's a pathway for Bijan Robinson to be the RB1 overall, like, just based on his pass usage alone. Like, he's going to be running routes. He's going to be getting goal line touches. I don't see, if Bijan Robinson fails, we're going to have some conversations with Arthur Smith. Like, that's kind of my perspective on it. I don't see how Bijan Robinson as an athlete fails. It's going to have to be something about the system that makes it so that Bijan isn't able to produce at RB1 levels in fantasy.
I know not everybody gets to play in Scott Fishbowl, but Calvin Brown threw out there that he took Bijan at the 111 in Scott Fishbowl. I did lie to you, Calvin. I said I took him there as well. I forgot McCaffrey fell to me at 111. I took McCaffrey at 11 and got Bijan on the 2-2 turn. So I walked out with McCaffrey and Bijan. I have the best 2 running backs. It worked out really, really well for me. But our crew today obviously believes in Bijan Robinson. Now, Jafar drafted him, so clearly he's going to believe in Bijan being the one. All right, Austin. So looking at the second half of this draft, we're starting to notice, the backup quarterbacks go, and it brings me back to what Zach did. And I think there's an interesting takeaway from just, if you look at just Zach's team in the second half of this draft. He walks away with Tua Tagovailoa at 14, and then Kyler Murray as a third quarterback at 18. But even if you just look at the next two quarterbacks, your boy Daniel Jones and then Geno Smith, if Zach had not taken Justin Herbert, he could have waited until 14 and walked out with Tua Tagovailoa linked to Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle, and then either Daniel Jones or Geno Smith on a 2 QB build. So that goes back to what we were talking about, like, look for ways to get different. And as we brought up, Zach was auto drafted for a little while, but in a small league like this, looking for a way to get different, I think is amazing.
Yeah, completely. And I think, like, for me, it's one of those things where it's like the way that you draft the first, I'd say 3 to 5 rounds of a 6-team draft or a 3-team draft, even if you're doing that, I feel like it really defines how the rest of your draft should go. So an example of this, I pulled up a 6-team draft that I did on Underdog recently where I took Patrick Mahomes with the 18th pick. So that was the 3rd round in a 6-teamer. And then I was able to get Daniel Jones in the 16th round as my second quarterback. And that was it. That was all I did. So when I took that one quarterback early, I decided I'm just going to wait and punt all the way. And with one of my last picks, take another quarterback. And I think with Zach's team, like, yeah, since he didn't take that quarterback early, he could have punted for a while. But, it's also nice to have Justin Herbert on your team, right? Like, the good thing about these 6-team leagues is you can draft a quarterback, you could draft a player, you could draft like a one position over another. And then by the time you get to your next pick, you're still in the same tier of player for the position you avoided. So, like, you can draft a running back in round 5 instead of a receiver. And by the time you get back to round 6, you're still in that same tier of receiving talent, which I think is nice for this. And it gives you a chance to kind of like leverage your strategy a little bit more.
Zach defending his Justin Herbert pick. We all love Justin Herbert, Zach. The point is you didn't need to draft him when you did. I want to take a look at JFar's team one last time before we move on to some of these other teams, because there's something interesting about his build, Austin, that raises a little concern for me. I'm going to scroll up a little bit here because it stood out to me. Cooper Kupp, Garrett Wilson, DeVonta Smith, Deebo Samuel, lots of running backs, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens. Underdog rules state that you are going to start 3 wide receivers and a flex spot. He has 6 total wide receivers. Is that a deep enough pool, even in a small league like this, to make wide receivers work?
Yeah, I think I would have wanted a 7th receiver in that. And then I think if I were going to do this build, I think like I would have maybe gotten another receiver instead of Alexander Mattison early on, because one way to think about these smaller leagues and to think about sit and go drafts in general is like, if you draft elite talent early, you don't need to draft that elite talent later. You don't need to draft that same position later, right? So like I ended up with 3 quarterbacks. I probably didn't need it, but I was it was quick. I was talking. I couldn't think of who I wanted. So I was like, Daniel Jones, whatever.
No, the story is you can't let Daniel Jones go undrafted. Don't make it like there was a mistake.
That's also true. But the fact that I took Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen with my 3rd and 4th picks, if I were doing this in a slow draft and had time to think about it and made sure their bye weeks didn't coincide, because I frankly don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's another big issue with Sleeper when you're playing around in best ball, is that bye weeks aren't right in your face. So.
Yeah, and so it's a little bit hard for me to just remember. So I went ahead and sniped that 3rd. But typically I would look at those 2 and I would say, okay, I got those 2. I don't need another quarterback, right? I'm betting on one of those 2 is going to be my starting quarterback every week. And so I don't need more depth and insurance. And so this applies a little bit more to running backs and wide receivers. But if I go running back heavy early, like I think Zach's team is a great example of this with Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne. I probably wouldn't have drafted another running back. I would have just done a 4 running back build and built my depth elsewhere, because it's a small league, and you're really kind of like betting on like, these are my 4 guys and they're going to be good to go.
I want to take a look at Burns' team, and it should be up on the screen right now, right towards the top. 10-2, he gets Brandon Ayuk, and he gets Brandon Ayuk about 12 picks after Deebo Samuel goes. And the San Francisco quarterback situation is cloudy at best. It seems that they want Brock Purdy to be the quarterback, but is Brock Purdy healthy enough to be the quarterback? Your boy Trey Lance is there, and there was a report this week that they would turn down a significant offer if received for Trey Lance. They seem very much set on keeping Trey Lance. And an interesting point was brought up by Joel Wirth last night on the Dynasty show is maybe San Fran isn't as in on Brock Purdy as an organization as Kyle Shanahan is. But I bring all this back to say Brandon Ayuk sort of had a breakout last year and certainly outperformed Deebo Samuel. But in the games where Brock Purdy played, Deebo Samuel was more targeted. The long way of saying this is by quick math, Brandon Ayuk was taken as the 27th wide receiver in this draft, and he was the wide receiver 16 in fantasy last year. Are people just expecting the downfall of Brandon Ayuk? Is he back in the doghouse for fantasy managers?
I think it's just like that whole offense is so uncertain. It's hard to predict. Like I wrote the article on George Kittle last week, and I'm like, I can tell you about George Kittle as a player, but I can't tell you anything about how the system is going to foster his success or failure. And when we're drafting on sites like Underdog, where it's half point PPR, touchdowns are a big deal. They're really important. And so do I feel certain that Brandon Ayuk is going to be the one getting the touchdowns when we have Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle all available to score touchdowns as well? Not to mention that they may not need to score that many touchdowns because that defense we're expecting to still be really good.
Yeah.
So I think it's such an uncertain situation. I feel like the San Francisco players are getting devalued in general. Like I think people see Debo's 2021 season, 2020 season.
2021 was the
2021 as like the spike year, and that was it, and that was an outlier. And so, I feel like they've kind of gone down in ADP relative to what they could actually perform to. But the problem is, like, I don't know that there's a lot of receivers I would take ahead of Brandon Ayuk that I would take Brandon Ayuk over that went ahead of him. I think maybe the example here is like, I might prefer Ayuk over D-Hop because I'm not sure. Like, I feel a little bit uneasy about taking DeAndre Hopkins in that Tennessee Titans offense, but it's really hard to argue taking Brandon Ayuk over Terry McLaurin, over Drake London, over Calvin Ridley, in my opinion.
See, I have him pretty well over everybody you mentioned, including Amari Cooper. I'm not as sold on Amari Cooper, but you are right. And then I have him over Deebo. So I probably would have taken him over Deebo. I would have taken him over Mattison at the 7-6 as we continue to pick on JFar with Mattison. Yeah. I think that's about where he falls. Obviously, I wouldn't have taken him over Keenan Allen because I love Keenan Allen and wouldn't take anybody over him. But I like Ayuk enough. And then I think the next pick by Zach, Christian Watson, is another one where I just don't know if he's getting the proper value, seeing as what he did in his healthy games last year. Joel Wirth wrote a great article that showed Christian Watson in the games where he played was a top 15 wide receiver. He just needs to keep his ass on the field, I think, is important there. What's your take overall on the Green Bay offense? There's been a lot of talk about the San Francisco offense, but Green Bay walks into a pretty nebulous situation where we've seen very limited Jordan Love, and this is widely regarded as a team that wants to run the football and has two running backs who can do so. Is Christian Watson being priced appropriately, even though there are people like me who think he could blow the top off of that ranking?
Yeah, my take on Christian Watson is that he is like he's being way overdrafted right now. In fact, I want to see if I've even taken Christian Watson. I have not.
I was going to say, now in this draft, if my math is right, he was the wide receiver 28. And that was just me quickly trying to count wide receivers while you were talking. So.
Yeah. So I've done 19 drafts just for the 2023 season. I did some stuff earlier in the year in the pre-draft process, but for like drafts that are running now, I've done 19 teams so far. I have 0 of Christian Watson. And I think I don't like his ADP right now because, yes, he was a top 15 receiver during those games, but a lot of that was because he was scoring a ton of touchdowns. And I don't feel confident that that's going to be a pathway, a sustainable pathway to success. I need to see more target share for him. And I agree with you, Ryan, that this Green Bay offense, I think, is going to run through the running backs. It's going to be a run-heavy offense, particularly for Jordan Love's first year. Like, I think Jordan Love probably knows this offense really well because he's gotten to sit and learn it for 3 years. But he hasn't had as many real-life reps in NFL games. And so I think Green Bay is going to try and make his life easier, as I think they should, to make sure they're maximizing his performance. And then outside of that, I'm just like, I don't know. It feels like a very uncertain receiver room. Like I don't feel like we really know which of these receivers are going to be that star elite talent.
Yeah, I like that. Austin, I think we inadvertently solved a problem that we've been trying to solve for years. As I'm looking over for my next question, you're the only team who drafted 3 tight ends, but I'm going to scroll up on the draft a little bit here. I think the way you solve the tight end problem is you make every fantasy league only be a 6-person league, because I like everybody's tight end groups in this league. I adore Zach getting Darren fucking Waller, the Giants' best wide receiver, as his tight end 1 in the 11th round. You were the only person who went with a 3 tight end build. I'm going to have you talk about that a little bit, but I'm going to have you talk about another possibly red flag for me. Brocal from the 1 spot. And we have always told people, if you go elite, go 1. Well, Austin, you broke that rule. You went elite and you went 2, or you went 3 rather. If you go elite, only go 1 backup. I'm saying this all wrong. Brocal went elite, only went 1 backup very late, and his backup is Dalton Kincaid. Does Dalton Kincaid have a strong enough role with the Buffalo Bills already that in a best ball tournament with no waivers, he should be your sole backup tight end?
Absolutely not, in my opinion.
I knew you would say that.
Yeah. So I'm at least finishing 5th in this league. That's my floor is how I see it. Like, all love, but I look at that team build, I'm like, I'm going to beat that team because, frankly, I know I took 3. I took 3 in this draft again because at the end I was like, I don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah, you went with a 3-3 build. Like, clearly, this is probably not your normal build in most best ball tournaments.
This is not my normal build. I typically go 2-2 when I go that early with quarterback, but yeah, it was weird today. It was quick. This is why I do slow drafts. So I typically would have gone. I typically only go 2 tight ends when I draft Travis Kelce. Basically, every other tight end, I'm doing a 3 tight end build unless I'm in a tournament because I don't trust anybody else. Like I all can tell a story about. I can tell a story about all of them.
Why they're going to have a mediocre season or a bad season. We're not going to say good.
Yeah, exactly. They're either going to be the tight end 2 or the tight end 20. Like I can tell you how that pathway works for all of them. So the only tight end I feel comfortable with, just 2 tight ends in this format, is Travis Kelce. And yeah, I think, let's see, while we have our handy little exposure rate up.
Yeah, go ahead and look at that, because Donnie Tubbs, I believe Donnie Tubbs might be Brocal based on how this is written here. So he is defending the Kincaid pick, saying that he's cool with it, or he's just defending Brocal. Like I said, I apologize if I got it wrong there. I'm reading into text with no context. So.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, like, I'm always about trust your gut, get your players that you want, but
Donnie Tubbs is Donflict, which makes a lot more fucking sense. So thank you there, buddy. Yes.
I've taken no Dalton Kincaid this year because I don't see the pathway there. There are so many receivers, so many mouths to feed in that Buffalo offense, and Dawson Knox is still there. He signed a contract extension. He still is a prominent target, and people say, I've heard the rebuttal already. Oh, Dalton Kincaid isn't a Dawson Knox replacement. He's an Isaiah McKenzie replacement. Guess what? They still have Khalil Shakir. They got homeboy who used to play for New Orleans. I can't remember his name. Deontay Hardy. Like I'm a little bit hesitant to be like, yeah, Kincaid's going to be just a slot receiver. Like first year tight ends, they struggle. The exception to the rule was Kyle Pitts.
Yes.
Who had a historic season.
Yeah, and not one that a lot of people expected from a rookie tight end to come out with 1,000 yards, but a singular touchdown not scored on American soil. So.
Yeah, like Kyle Pitts was the most athletic tight end that we've had in years. And even then people were like, oh, we'll check him out in a couple of years. And then he got 1,000 yards as a rookie year. Like, come on.
Yeah. Let's move over to Don Flick's team since he's in the comments with us right now. I'm very interested in his quarterback. He waited relatively long. He was only second to Zach on taking his first quarterback. Gets Justin Fields. He goes with a 3 quarterback build, but walks away with 3 damn good quarterbacks. Geno Smith was a top 5 quarterback in fantasy last year. Before we get into his quarterbacks, and Austin just kind of taking a look at, you think he should have stuck at 2 or maybe gone 3. Austin and I were referring to builds earlier, and I called it a 3-3 build, and he said he normally goes with a 2-2 build. What we're talking about there is the amount of quarterbacks and the amount of tight ends that you're going to put on your team. Typically, your debate when it comes to roster construction is how many quarterbacks, how many tight ends, and how are you going to split the rest of the running backs and wide receivers? I know that sounds like it makes a lot of sense, but when you start talking best ball, you're going to hear a lot of people calling him, like 2-6-7-2 builds and just like weird things like that. So that's what we're talking about on a 3-3 build or a 2-2 build. We talked about Zach not needing to go quarterback. However, I think it's 4 of the 6 teams went with 3 quarterback builds, Donflick being one of them. Austin, you obviously said you accidentally went into a 3 quarterback build, but this feels like a really interesting way to do a 3 quarterback build because you have Justin Fields, which is all rushing upside all the time. You have Dak Prescott, who should still be in a relatively high passing volume offense. And then you have Geno Smith, which is slow and steady, wins the race. Did he need to take Geno Smith there, or should he have looked elsewhere?
I think I like taking the Geno Smith there. So, like when I just look at all of these teams, I think Brokow doing 3 quarterback makes sense. I think Don Flick doing 3 quarterback makes sense. I shouldn't have gone 3 quarterback. I can see the case for Zach doing it. For Pete Bournes, I would have gone 3 quarterback, and for Jay Farr, I could see the 2 quarterback build. But looking back at Don Flick, like the thing about taking Justin Fields that early is there's a lot of injury risk there because he has so much rushing upside. So I think that's part of the thing is like when I take a guy like Justin Fields, when I take Lamar Jackson, even Jalen Hurts, like some of these players that they've shown injury history in the past, or they're running quarterbacks, and so they have some injury risk from that. I'll lean more towards the 3 quarterback builds because of that. Also, like Dak Prescott misses time pretty frequently. So I think for Donflict, I feel good with a 3 quarterback build there, especially because you're getting Geno Smith with your last pick.
Yeah, and it's almost like I can't let Daniel Jones go undrafted. It feels kind of ridiculous letting Geno Smith, the QB5 from last year, go undrafted.
Yeah, exactly.
We had someone in the chat actually bring up one of your picks, Calvin Ridley, moving up the rankings with the eyeball emoji there. I would say this is pretty equal to where I think he's going in redraft leagues right now. What is your overall take on Calvin Ridley in the Jacksonville wide receiver room? Because I have been a proponent where I think he and Christian Kirk can be good. Does one vulture the other? Does it matter? As a Falcons fan, you got up close and personal looks at Calvin Ridley, but nobody's really seen him play since 2021 at this point.
Yeah, I felt nervous about this pick. I love Calvin Ridley, like emotionally and with my heart. Like I'm just like, yes, I want to pull for Calvin Ridley. He's similar to what I was saying about the tight ends earlier. Like I can tell a story of how he pops off, and I can tell a story how he just has the kind of mediocre season. I don't think he full on, craters. I think he's going to be at least a wide receiver 2 candidate throughout the year. But I agree with you. I think there's still a role for Christian Kirk in this offense, and like the fact that he's going 5 rounds after Calvin Ridley in this draft, and so that's like basically 2.5 rounds in a 12-team league. Like I think that's a little bit far. Like the distance between them shouldn't be as great, because I think particularly in this format of best ball, like Calvin Ridley is probably going to be the more consistent of the 2. If I had to guess, like he's probably going to get targets every week. Whereas Christian Kirk, like he had some serious ceiling games last year where he would like all of a sudden pop off for 2 touchdowns. And I think that's where having Kirk in a best ball league is particularly interesting. Like he had several weeks where all of a sudden it was like, oh, he's scoring 30 PPR points, 25 PPR points. And it's just like, I think he's going to be more of that ceiling play than Ridley. So yeah, I think they should be closer. And I do think that Jacksonville can sustain both of them. I do worry a little bit about like, can they sustain both of them and Travis Etienne? And so I'm oftentimes avoiding Etienne for that reason. But yeah, I'm good with both of those Jacksonville receivers.
There's a notorious joke in Club Fantasy that I used to over project the hell out of the Cowboys, and that has now moved to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I am over projecting a offense that is going to feed not only Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk, not only Travis Etienne and keeping Evan Ingram alive, but I still think Zay Jones is a viable fantasy option this year. I am all in on the Jacksonville Jaguars. At the very least, this kind of lends itself to something we've talked about before. Go get Trevor Lawrence just so you get the best piece of that offense, because I think it's going to be a very, very fun offense. But talking about these wide receiver 2s brings me to my keep, trade, cut question for you this week, Austin. And you don't even get anybody to take any of the heat off of you. I was thinking about wide receiver 2s. I was thinking about the Joe Burrow injury. And so I wanted to look at T. Higgins, Jaylen Waddle, and DeVonta Smith. Three guys that are technically their own teams, wide receiver 2, but I don't think anybody would have an issue calling them a fantasy wide receiver 1. You have to keep trade cut T. Higgins, Jaylen Waddle, and DeVonta Smith. Make somebody angry.
Yeah, this one's pretty easy for me. It's probably going to be, well, I guess I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know who's going to be mad at me on this one because it could go so many ways. But I'm going to keep Jaylen Waddle. I'm going to trade DeVonta Smith, and I will cut T. Higgins. It's not because I'm worried about Trevor Lawrence or Joe Burrow as much that I'm going to cut T. Higgins. It's just that I don't think you're going to get the trade value for him. This is where we kind of end up every week. Like if I was just saying like which of those players I want to trade, I would want to trade T. Higgins and cut DeAndre Swift. But who do I think is going to give me more trade value? It's DeVonta Smith. Like I think everybody's going to be afraid of T. Higgins. So I'll cut him and try and get more off of a trade from DeVonta Smith.
See, I would argue with you on this one. I don't think there is more trade value. I believe Jaylen Waddle is the best receiver of the bunch? Absolutely. But cool. I also believe everybody does, and he has immense trade value. And I'm not angry if I have DeVonta Smith or T. Higgins. I think I probably keep DeVonta Smith, and I think I probably cut T. Higgins. But I think I trade Jaylen Waddle here for the trade depth of it. And I love that this keep trade cut has really just been like, who has the most trade value? But you went a different way this week, and I found that interesting. But I mean, there's no arguing with Jaylen Waddle being the best of that bunch. And if Tyreek Hill misses time, and let's not forget, Tyreek Hill got himself into a little bit of illegal hot water again this offseason, Jaylen Waddle becomes a top 3 wide receiver instead of a top 10 wide receiver. Over on Twitch, DSJ brings up something interesting that we talked about earlier in the draft. DSJ, if you work backwards a little bit, wouldn't it be good to go RB heavy early on in the draft with all the wide receiver depth? And Austin, I feel like we noticed that pretty well. We didn't say that, so great call out by DSJ there, but we noticed these running backs going early, and we kind of faulted it to Sleeper's ADP. But if you look at some of the teams, specifically Zach's team, who did go 4 running backs in his first 6 picks, and actually so did Burns right next to him. So yeah, let's look at those 2 rosters. Burns starts off with a hero wide receiver, if you will, Tyreek Hill, Chris Olave, and then just loads up Terry McLaurin, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Williams, Mike Evans. Don't love Kadarius Toney or Zay Flowers, but they're so far down on your depth chart, it doesn't matter. But then Zach completes his Charger stack. So he gets Diggs and Adams, goes Keenan Allen, Drake London, Christian Watson, Tyler Lockett, Jordan Addison, and then obviously he disappoints you by taking Quentin Johnston. I think seeing this in action, whereas in a 12-team league, everybody's trying to get the super talented wide receivers early. In this league, taking the running backs while they're staring you in the face and letting wide receiver fall to you seems to have worked, Austin.
Yeah, exactly. You know, when I do this, when I think about which direction I'm going to go, I'm often reading the room and deciding to pick a pathway based on how everyone else is going. So I totally agree with DSG's point where I'm like, yeah, going heavy or running back early can be really beneficial in this format. Like I just put up another draft that I have done on Underdog where I started out Austin Eckler, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, Aaron Jones, and then I got David Montgomery later on. Like I don't have to stress about the running back position at that point. And so I'm going to then still be able to get a ton of quality receivers. Like in this league, I actually got Tyreek Hill in the first round and still had T. Higgins, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, Deontay Johnson. Like the running back depth is really good. So I do like to do that strategy in these smaller drafts, particularly when other people aren't doing it. So for me, like I noticed really early, there's a lot of people going for 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm just going to box out the quarterback slot then and get probably who's going to be the top 2 quarterbacks in the league this year and focus on getting more value at some of the running back positions later on.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. Austin, we've done a great job. I want to give you some time I'm going to get your team up on the screen here and highlight it. With these small drafts, what do you normally think going in? Were you able to do exactly what you wanted to do? Were there any snipes on either side of you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I typically, like I said, funny enough, in these smaller drafts, I'm looking to get contrarian, which is like something we talk about in tournament drafts where like there's so many people you have to get different.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The enormous 9 million person tournament and the very tiny 6-person draft have that very much in common is you need to get weird as hell. In a standard 12-team league, you want steady. In a small league or in an enormous league, you want weird.
Yeah, and then the way I'm getting contrarian is different in both. So like in tournaments, the way I'm getting contrarian is I'm targeting like specific teams. I'm stacking heavily on like week 17 matchups. I'm picking some players that I think like in the 17th, 18th round who I think are being slept on and are going to finish way ahead of their ADP. But in these smaller leagues, and these 3-teamers and these 6-teamers, the way I'm getting contrarian is by building my roster differently than what I would typically do. And so, like getting those 2 top end quarterbacks, I would never do that in a tournament. I would never do that in a tournament. And I want to be very clear about that. Like, this is very specific. I would never do it in a 12-team league. I would only do this in 3-teamers and 6-teamers because I'm betting on I picked the top 2 quarterbacks. So my strategy coming into this draft was to read the room and do what other people are not doing. And I think I accomplished that by going Travis Kelce early, locking down the tight end position, and by getting the top 2 quarterbacks and locking down that position early. Where things went kind of sideways for me was really with my last 3 picks. I didn't really I didn't want to have 3 tight ends and 3 quarterbacks. I would have preferred 2 and 2. But I was just like, as we were going through, the draft was moving quickly, and I was talking, and I was just like, I'm going to pick the best players. And sometimes when I'm in these smaller teams, I'm like, well, do I really like? I'll have 7 or 8 wide receivers, and I'll think to myself, do I really expect like 5 of these guys to get hurt and
Yeah.
my receivers to be shot? Like, probably not. And so then I'll end up getting a 3rd tight end or a 3rd quarterback just because of that. But it really depends. And then the only other thing I'd point out about my lineup is I tried to go with a 4 running back build.
I was literally that. If you didn't bring it up, I was going to. Is this something you practice, or is this just something that happened because you accidentally took an extra quarterback and tight end?
I wanted to try it, and I've been
Okay.
thinking about this lately. And I did this. I think I did this in a 3-person draft recently, or I like
So
almost
anybody
did
who
it.
hasn't been able to see it, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Damian Pierce, David Montgomery are my guys' only running backs. Barkley, you could argue, injury history. Thankfully, his contract's fixed. Josh Jacobs, contract not fixed. Damian Pierce, a little bit of an injury history. I love David Montgomery, though.
Yeah,
So.
you know, I might have tried to get some different running backs to do this build,
Yeah,
but
maybe not. This might not be the ideal 4 running backs for a 4 running back build.
yeah, but I like the idea of doing a 4 running back build here because it's a way, again, a way that you can get different in your roster construction in one of these smaller leagues, which I think is one of the ways that you can really get advantages. It's like everybody's like, there's a good chance that a lot of people are going to approach these by getting 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, or 3 tight ends, 5 or 6 running backs, and then 7 receivers.
Yeah.
But if you change that just slightly, like all of a sudden, like you've taken an extra receiver that somebody else isn't getting, you've taken an extra tight end that someone's not getting. So I'm willing to kind of like be more aggressive on some of my roster build strategies there. And so I tried the 4 out. I like it for the most part. I'm just going to kind of assume that Barkley and Jacobs play and don't get hurt.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fun way to do it, and it allowed me to get more depth elsewhere.
No, I think it's interesting. I think, and it's been kind of the theme of today's show, I think roster construction is an overlooked way of getting different. And I think you said that very well. You articulated it perfectly, that you don't just have to go out and take weird ass players. You can just build your team a lot different than the rest of the people in your league built your team. And that could be the thing that sets you ahead of them. And one thing I'll always caution folks is don't get all freaked out when Underdog shows you that you're going to score the fewest points in the league or even the most points in the league when it's all said and done, because this is so rudimentary projections, strictly focused on build. The guy who drafts 3 quarterbacks almost always comes out on top of that. So Austin with 3 quarterbacks and 3 tight ends, you literally said, you're at least finishing 5th. I'm pretty sure Underdog would have put you first because you had 3 quarterbacks and 3 tight ends. So
yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I think also something that's important to note when Underdog shows you your projections is they're showing you your projections based on your total of all 18 players. That's not how many points they're going to score,
yeah,
because you're going to have 2 tight ends not starting every week because you're going to just take your best tight end. And so it's a little bit like, yeah, okay, this is your total possible points, sure, based off of your entire team, but that's not how it's going to actually play out throughout the season. So yeah, I wouldn't stress about it too much. And I think what I would also do is, like, if you've done this before, like played 6-teamers and 3-teamers in the past, like go back to your prior seasons and look at the builds you did and learn from what worked and what didn't work. Like that's how I have figured out how to implement new strategies and target the certain players. Like I think I had a draft last year. I went back and looked back on where I had Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts. That was it.
Probably felt great at the time.
Felt great at the time, but when they were both injured and not hitting their ceiling, did not feel great. And so now I learned from that, you know what? I only have one tight end that I trust and a 2 tight end build.
We're looking at you, Don Flick, George Kittle, and Kyle Pitts this year. No, no, that's absolutely perfect. Speaking of Don Flick, all love, always. You make our Monday better by playing with us. Like this was awesome, and we very much appreciate everybody who drafts with us and everyone who tunes into the show. We try to have fun with this. I'm going to quickly knock out my oops of the draft, and I'm going to pick on Zach a little bit, but I'm actually picking on the rest of the league. Zach had a chance to have the best draft here by far. If he does not take Justin Herbert, we've been picking on him, but that's not the oops of the draft. The oops of the draft is the rest of the league letting Darren Waller get to the 11th round while we have teams drafting 2 tight ends already, and Zach just waited and waited. Zach, latest quarterback and latest tight end won, and I think that worked out really well in a small draft. So my oops is everybody for letting Darren Waller fall that far, but it's a secondary oops to Zach with, man, if you had just not taken Herbert, you could have built a winner in this very fake mock draft. Austin, what a show. This turned out better than I could have even dreamed with just me and you chatting about a very small draft. Please let the people know what you're working on. Talk about tonight's show because there's a reason we did this show today because of something you're working on tonight.
Yeah, exactly. So right now I'm just in the heat of best ball content. Right now we've been recording our best ball episodes and they drop every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern time exclusively on YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube page. And tonight we're talking all about small field strategy. So we even talk about 3-team leagues because there is still strategy there, right? It's not just like, oh, I get a bunch of great players. No, there's strategy to how to win and optimize in those leagues. That episode will drop tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. So make sure to watch it. Apart from that, if you're looking to do best ball tournaments or want to just get some player takes, I have my week 17 best ball guide. It's on clubfantasyffl.com. Beyond that, I'm starting to prep for the regular season and get ready to do some DFS content.
I love it. Austin's our DFS guy. He puts out an article every what day do we even drop your article? Fridays normally, right?
Yeah.
I'm not in season mode yet, but no, Austin hit it on the head. Make sure you're following Club Fantasy on Twitter at Club Fantasy FFL. Check out the website at clubfantasyffl.com. But more importantly, just hit subscribe on this YouTube channel. We go live almost every single night of the week. We don't just cover fantasy football season long. We cover DFS. We cover Dynasty. We cover best ball. We cover fantasy golf. We are here to help you guys win at anything you want to play. I'm not even going to run through the entire schedule. Make sure you check out the best ball show tonight and make sure you hit that subscribe button. We have articles dropping all the time. Ton of great stuff. I've kept you all way too long. So thank everybody for tuning in. Thank everybody for drafting with us. Please remember that defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We will see you at next week's mock. Have a great week.